All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another edition of our Beyond Access series. My name is Balaish, Family Empowerment Communications Coordinator with the NYC DOE, and I will be your host for tonight's evening. Before we get handed over to Include NYC for tonight's final meeting of our IEP process, just want to make a couple of announcements as always. So as I'm sure you are aware, but for anyone new joining us, we do not have a chat function, so you're not able to chat with us, but you are able to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. Now, we will be able to try to answer any questions that we can throughout the presentation, but don't worry, we do set time at the end of each webinar to make sure that you can ask all your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end through the Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, if you feel like you miss anything, do not worry. We do record all of these sessions, and we're going to make sure that we post them on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So make sure you look out for an announcement email on that. If you don't follow our YouTube channel, you're missing out. We have a lot of great content on special education, and of course, the first two of this three-part series with Include NYC. And also, just as a reminder to everyone, next week is our last Beyond Access series webinar of this year. It will be due on summer movement, so please look out for an announcement email on that as well. But for tonight, we are very excited to be joined by Panna Poto, the Manager of Family and Parent Engagement with Include NYC, who will be doing this webinar on the IEP meeting. This will go over tips on preparing for your child individual education program, the meeting, including information about your role, who will attend, and tips for getting organized. And I also just want to make sure to give a special welcome to Kimberly Ramones, the Senior Executive Director of Instruction and Compliance for the Special Education Office, and she will be doing the Q&A at the end with Panna at the end of this webinar. But without further ado, I want to hand it over to Panna. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ori. So if you guys just give me a quick second, I'm going to share my screen. So hi, everybody. I welcome you here tonight to hear about preparing for your child's IEP meeting. As Ori said, I'm the Manager of Parent and Family Engagement here at Include NYC. I am also the parent of 2 children who have IEPs. So this is not only professional for me, it's also personal because I've been where you are trying to prepare for my children's IEP meetings. So before we start, I'm just going to introduce you to Include NYC and who we are. Include NYC is the leading New York City source of training and information for young people ages 0 to 26 with known or suspected disabilities. So we've been around since 1983. We've been around for a while. And we believe that young people should be fully included in school, in the workforce, in the community, and they should have access to resources, services, and supports to be able to succeed. So we have our website here, includenyc.org, and our helpline as well. So we have a helpline in English, Spanish, and more recently, we also have a Chinese helpline as well. So I'll be sharing more information about that later on at the end. So this slide just gives you a quick overview about our reach and all the families that we were able to reach last year. So a little bit about what we do. So I mentioned our helpline. Our helpline is our way that we are able to connect with families. So families will call the helpline. An intake coordinator is going to take their information and set them up for a phone appointment with a family educator who will be able to provide some one-on-one support and technical assistance. We also do a variety of workshops, so special education, early intervention, behavior, transition, etc. And we also have a really great newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to it, please do subscribe. You can find information on how to do that at includenyc.org. So let's get into why you are here tonight. So as Ori mentioned, this training is the last in a series of 3 webinars that Include NYC did as a part of the Beyond Access series, and they were all done on the IEP. So our first session covered the special education process, including timelines for referral, evaluation, services, placement, the parents' rights and their role. The second session went through the actual IEP document, and including its purpose, how it's developed, and how parents and students participate. So today we will discuss how you can prepare for your next IEP meeting. So here are our learning objectives for tonight. When you leave tonight, I would really love for you guys to be able to understand the different types of IEP meetings and the role of the team members, which includes you as the parent. I want you to be able to try to implement at least 3 or more strategies that you can use to prepare for your child's IEP meeting, and to also be able to identify steps to take if you do not agree with decisions made during your child's IEP meeting. So your child has gone through the referral and evaluation processes, and it has been determined that they're eligible for services. Now that the evaluations and any other information are available, an IEP meeting will be held. So please note that eligibility is established if a child has a disability and requires special programs and services in order to participate, benefit, and progress in an educational program. So before we get into actually preparing for the IEP meeting, let us review what an IEP is. So what is an IEP, right? So as I mentioned before, once your child is found eligible for special education, the IEP will be developed. So IEP stands for Individualized Education Program. So we have a description of what an IEP is here and what it includes. So first here, we have the present levels of performance, also known as the plot. So the plot is a snapshot of your child's current academic achievement and functional performance. So if your child has an IEP, think of the first page of the IEP, like right below where it will have the name, implementation date, and all of that. There's going to be a section called the present levels of performance. So you want to think about how your child is currently developing and how his or her disability impacts him or her, including how it impacts him or her in the school environment. So this section should include any results from any recent assessments, evaluations, progress reports, etc. The plot is the foundation upon which the rest of the IEP will be developed. It also summarizes your child's most important accomplishments and areas that need to be addressed. You are encouraged to share your child's most notable strengths and challenges so they can be noted here as well. And any diagnoses can be included in this section as well. And then the IEP also includes parental concerns. So what are you concerned about? Could be that your child is not reading on level, or maybe your child is struggling with comprehension. There may be some behavioral or social emotional development concerns. If so, you can have them noted in the parental concerns section. And then we have the goals. So your child's IEP should include goals that can meet your child's needs and help him or her make progress. So some things that the team is going to consider: what services does your child need in order to meet these goals? Are these services enough for the child to be successful in attaining them? So think about what you would like your child to work on, right? So as the parent, you have a right to contribute to the goal development process. Do you know what a SMART goal is? Let's review that. So I'm sure you may have heard about SMART goals, and you want to make sure that your child's IEP goals are SMART. So the S stands for specific, right? The goal has to be specific. It has to target a specific area of improvement. The goal has to be measurable. So how long is it going to take your child to be able to meet this goal? So it should suggest an indicator for improvement. It should also be attainable. So think about, how will this goal be accomplished? So for example, if there's an area of need, what needs to be worked on? It could be reading, writing, social skills, transition, communication, etc. And then with R, we want to think about, is the goal realistic? Is it relevant? Can this goal be achieved? Are you meeting the child where they are? And then it also has to be timely. So specify by when the results will be achieved. So it could be the end of the school year, it could be the end of the quarter. Also on your child's IEP, I know this is one of the first sections that a lot of parents look at, right? Even though we should be reading the whole IEP, but a lot of us will look at those services. We want to make sure that those services are on there. And so some examples of services could be occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, counseling. And for counseling, it would address any social, emotional, and behavioral needs that can negatively impact students in the school environment. So remember that your child's instruction and services should be provided in the least restrictive environment to the greatest extent possible. Some other things that can be mentioned on the IEP: accommodations. So think about if the instruction needs to, how will the instruction be changed? How do your child learns the material, right? And then there are modifications. It will change what a student is taught or expected to learn. So the material is modified to meet your child at their current level. And so last but not least, you want to remember that special education is not a place, it's not a school, it's not a class. Special education is services. What services is your child getting? So what makes a quality IEP, right? So I'm sure, some of you are parents, your children have IEPs. How do you know that they have a quality IEP? You want to make sure that the IEP is current, right? That is up to date, that the information is correct. It shouldn't be copied and pasted from one year to the next. It needs to be a new document. It needs to have new, achievable, and appropriate goals. So remember, we're talking about SMART goals. So you want to think about, are the goals on this IEP SMART? And then you want to also think about services and accommodations that will make a difference for your child. And everything should be in writing on the IEP. Do not accept any unwritten promises. So who's in charge of the special education process? And this is very important to know because this also impacts your child's IEP. So if you look on the left column, we highlight here what kind of setting that your child may be attending. So with preschool, for kids 3 to 5, the Committee on Preschool Special Education will be in charge of your child's special education process. And then there will be some individuals at the school that will handle the IEP meetings in conjunction with the CPSC administrator. If your child is in a public school, so they might be in a District 75 school, they might be in a community school, it will be the school-based IEP team who will be in charge of the special education process for your child. Maybe your child is attending a private school or a non-public school, right? It will be the Committee on Special Education, and that would be for children who are considered school age, so ages 5 to 21. If your child attends a school outside of New York City, it would still be the Committee on Special Education, but in the home district where the child lives. So they will be in charge of your child's special education services. So to give you an example, if you live in the Bronx, but your child attends a school in Westchester, it will be the Committee on Special Education in the Bronx in your district that will be in charge of the special education process for your child. So this slide about the IEP meeting, it gives you a general overview about what will be discussed at your IEP meeting. So in addition to any input or information that you would like to share about your child. So let's go through it. So any current evaluations, report cards, progress reports, and when we talk about evaluations in each area of suspected disability, right? Also, this meeting will be where you can identify and describe your child's needs and have a discussion with the team about how your child's needs will be met. It will also be used to determine what services and supports are appropriate for your child, what programs are appropriate for your child. It will also be where you would determine the least restrictive setting in which services will be provided. And I know that my colleague, if you were here at the first session, she went over what the least restrictive environment is. And I know restrictive can sound, it can have a negative connotation for families, but just think of it as what level of support does your child need? And the least restrictive environment can range anywhere from a general education classroom to a special education classroom. And then there are even more restrictive settings beyond that. So let's talk about the different types of IEP meetings. Note that most meetings are still taking place remotely, such as video conference or by phone. So there are several types of IEP meetings that I have noted here. We have that initial IEP meeting. So that's the first meeting that you will have after your child has been referred and they've had their evaluations. So all your child's documentation will be reviewed at this meeting, And this is when it will be determined if your child is eligible for special education services. If your child is eligible, then their IEP will be developed. We also have the annual meeting. This meeting is held once a year to discuss your child's progress with their goals and services and what changes need to be made for the new school year. The IEP team, which includes you, will also consider your child's needs and if they still require special education services to meet those needs. We also have the requested review meeting. So a requested review meeting indicates that an IEP meeting is needed before the annual meeting. Typically, a requested review is requested when there is new information that the team needs to consider about your child. So as noted on the slide, you need sufficient reason to have a requested review meeting. You should make this request to the IEP coordinator at your child's school or to the Committee on Special Education if your child is at a non-public school. So what are sufficient reasons? It could include that your child may have regressed, your child is not getting services as mandated on the IEP, you may have new evaluation reports available, or a provider may indicate that there's a need for additional services. So those are just some examples. A requested review meeting can also be requested if there's a need for a change in service delivery or the current setting where your child is no longer appropriate. And then we have the reevaluation meeting. Your child may need to be reevaluated if it is determined by your child's school that new evaluations are needed. You as the parent can also request new evaluations if you have concerns about your child's placement and services. So it can only be done once a year unless you and the IEP team agree in writing, right? Your inputs will be needed as the IEP team assesses which evaluations will be needed. Your child is also entitled to a mandated 3-year reevaluation. Some of you may know of this as the triennial. This must occur once every 3 years. The exception to this is if you and the DOE mutually, and when I say DOE, I mean the Department of Education, mutually agree that it is not needed. So for all evaluations, parental consent is required. And I'm actually going through this right now with my son. So he's in the process of his mandated 3-year reevaluation. Once the evaluation process is completed, you will have a meeting to discuss the results with the team. You are entitled to all copies of evaluations. So any assessments, any evaluations, and this is not just for the 3-year re-eval. Anytime your child is evaluated, you are entitled to those assessments and you should be getting them in advance of the meeting, right? So you have a chance to review them and meaningfully participate in the meeting. And also you should be given a 5 days notice for your meeting. If you are not notified within this time frame, you have a right to request a new meeting date. I usually tell parents, if you're doing this, you want to give some dates and let the team know that you're flexible. So the annual review and the mandated 3-year reevaluation are expected to be initiated by the Department of Education. So receiving a notice from them means that something is happening. So if you see that date, that implementation date on the IEP or the projected date of your next meeting is coming up and you haven't heard anything about your meeting, you may want to reach out to your team. So I've said the word team quite a lot tonight. So who's on the team, right? Decisions are made by a team that meets to review your child's information and to make decisions. So I just want to emphasize the role of the parent. If you notice, we have the parent at the top of the page. So as the parent, you are a valuable member of your child's IEP team. You know your child best, and so you are encouraged to come ready to give insights about your child's progress, development, skills, what they're struggling with, what they're good at, how they learn, and any relevant information that can be used to support your child in the school environment. This is a time to share information, ask questions, be fully engaged as a part of the discussion that the team is having about your child. So we will discuss your rights a little bit later. Here we also have the general education teacher, right? So your child may be in a general education classroom or integrated co-teaching classroom known as an ICT class. And so they'll have a general education teacher. So if your child is participating in a general education environment, the general education teacher can be at the IEP meeting. So they can be able to attend to provide information on how your child is accessing the curriculum in the general ed classroom. How is your child performing in this setting? Are there any supports that your child needs? They can provide some insight on that as well. If you're, like I mentioned before, if your child is in an integrated co-teaching classroom, they'll have a general education teacher. And next, they'll also have a special education teacher. So the special education teacher has special training to teach and support children with disabilities. They can assist with any decisions about supports that your child may need, services that your child may need, any modification to the curriculum, goal setting, and also unless the student is only receiving related services, right? If the child is only receiving related services, like there might be some children in the general ed classroom who are only getting related services, then they will only have a general ed teacher. Coming back to the special education teacher, they will also discuss the present levels of performance. So you remember we spoke about the plot. They will help to interpret any reports and assessments in addition to any support that your child may need. If your child is in an ICT class, they can help to adapt the gen ed curriculum for your child. If your child has any related services providers, so your child may be getting speech, your child may be getting OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy, those therapists can also attend the meeting to be able to provide some insight into how your child is doing. There should also be a representative from the school district, so a district representative, and they will act as the chair of the meeting. They will facilitate the discussion. This person must be knowledgeable about special education services, and the district representative role may be filled by another member of the team. So it could be a school psychologist, or there might be a designated person. I know some schools may have like an IEP coordinator who can facilitate these meetings. And then last but not least, this person could be, so an individual who can interpret the evaluation results. It could be a school psychologist. So let's say your child had an evaluation. There should be somebody there who can help to interpret these evaluation results and really have a discussion about how these evaluation results can be used to inform your child's goals, services, placement, etc. How can they be used to inform how your child is taught in the classroom? So these are some of the questions that this individual can answer and discuss at your meeting. Some additional members. So other individuals with knowledge or special expertise about your child as determined by the parent or school district. So it could be a specialist that your child sees outside of school. So maybe you have your child seeing a speech therapist outside of school, or your child has a developmental pediatrician or some kind of specialist or somebody who has expertise on your child. They can also participate in this meeting. So for parents of younger children, if you have a child who is transitioning from early intervention to preschool services, you may be able to have your service coordinator at this meeting so that they can be able to provide some insight as well. Whenever appropriate, the students can also attend their meeting. In fact, this should be encouraged, since not only are students entitled to participate in their own meeting, participating gives them the opportunity to practice self-advocacy at an early age. So I know transition age starts around 14, but there might be some kids who are younger who may be able to come to their own meetings and really advocate for themselves. And then we have a parent member. If you would like a parent member at your meeting, you have to make this request at least 72 hours in advance in writing. So this individual helps parents understand information that's happening at the meeting, and they can participate in the meeting by explaining procedures, helping to make sure that your questions are being answered, you're being listened to, and it can clarify any kind of information that you need clarified. For families who their first language is not English, their primary language is not English, you can also, it's not on the slide, but I'm just going to mention it here. You can also request an interpreter at your meeting. Like the parent member, this request should also be made 72 hours in advance in writing. For older students, with the consent of the parents, you may be able to have a representative from another agency at this meeting. So for example, If your child is receiving services through the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, you may be able to invite your care coordinator or your care manager to your IEP meeting. You can invite anybody to your meeting. So if you want to have a friend that can come to be able to provide support and take notes, you can also have them come to the meeting as well. So I just want to emphasize the parents here in this process. You won't always have the same educators at the IEP meeting, but there is one person that will always be constant, and that's you, the parent. And so as parents, you have rights to be notified and participate in all meetings about your child. Anything that concerns the steps regarding special education. So when it comes to identification, evaluation, eligibility, the development of your child's IEP, your annual meetings, and the mandated 3-year reevaluation. So any part of this special education process, you have a right to be involved in that process. You are a valuable team member at any and all of your child's IEP meetings. So now let's get into how you can actually prepare for your meeting. So how do you prepare for your IEP meetings, right? So the first thing we have here, you need to know when it's happening, right? You need to know how it's going to be held. Is it in person? Is it virtual? I know, like I said before, a lot of the meetings are happening virtually. You want to confirm the meeting date, the time, the platform. Is it Zoom? Is it Teams? Is it Google Meet, right? These platforms also can give parents an opportunity to call in, so you may be able to participate by phone. If you are participating by video, you may want to let the team know that it might be helpful for you if they can have the IEP up on the screen so you can see what you're actually working on during the meeting. It's important to be on time. Meetings are often held back to back, so you want to ensure that you have the full amount of time for your meeting. So you definitely want to be on time. And like I mentioned before, if a date is proposed and you're not able to make that date, you want to let the team know ahead of time so that you can work together to find a date that works for everyone. You want to submit copies of outside evaluations so you can make a judgment call if you would like to do that. If you want to have the outside evaluations considered, you would want to submit them before the meeting. So the same way you would want to get evaluations done by the Department of Education in advance is the same way the team will also want to get anything you have to offer, any kind of notes or forms or evaluations. They would also want to get them ahead of time. So progress reports, letters from any kind of service providers, you want to make sure that the team has access to that. Submit all medical forms before your child's meeting. So this is really important. For example, if your child gets busing, you want to make sure that medical accommodation form is submitted to the team. If your child takes medication while at school, right? If your child has particular health needs that will need to be addressed in the school environment, you want to make sure that these forms are completed by your child's doctor, right? And there's also the HIPAA form that would need to be completed as well. So I'll give you an example about the medical accommodations form for busing, right? When the doctor completes this form, you want to make sure the doctor is very detailed about how your child's diagnosis could affect him or her on the school bus and how his or her learning could be impacted without these accommodations. So any recommendation should be made on how your child needs to be supported. And I give this example of busing because sometimes some doctors can be very vague. Like I gave a parent this example earlier today on a helpline call that I had. The doctor would say, you know, child has autism, needs small bus. That's not enough to be able to qualify, to be able to get medical accommodations for the bus. So medical accommodations, I'll just give you a quick example. It could be bus with fewer students, climate control, or limited time travel. So we also have that you, like I mentioned, you have a right to get copies of all your child's evaluations. You want to review the paperwork in advance. Go through your child's paperwork, go through their progress reports, look at their IEP, their current IEP, look at their evaluations, highlight any parts of it that are of concern to you or that you want to discuss, annotate, make notes. So when you come to the meeting, you're coming ready to be a meaningful part of the team and to really engage. So like I said, you know, contact your child's providers before the meeting. You should not be getting any surprises at the meeting. honestly. Like if you already have built that relationship with your child's related services providers and their teachers, it should be an ongoing conversation about your child's progress, right? So for example, if your child's speech therapist is considering discontinuing services because they believe that your child has made a lot of progress, you should not be hearing this for the first time at the IEP meeting. You should already have that line of communication open with your child's therapist so that you can already have had this discussion before you even get to the meeting. You can elect to have special education records sent to you electronically by mail. So when we talk about special education records, we're talking about any notices, prior written notice, your child's IEP, assessments, progress reports, or any materials that you are requesting. So like I said, once you have these records, you want to make sure that you review them, right? And write down any questions that you may have. So gather all your information before the IEP meeting. So remember, we went over when to request a parent member or an interpreter for your meeting. So preparing includes making requests for these supports on time so you have them at your meeting. So remember, I talked about the parent member and the interpreter, and I said you have to request them in writing 72 hours in advance of your meeting. So like I also said, you also have a right to invite anyone who may have expertise on your child. You want to give the IEP coordinator or the district representative some notice and let them know who's going to be coming to the meeting. So as I mentioned before, this could be a provider who sees your child outside of school, right? You could also invite a family member or a friend for support. So like I mentioned before, you should have an ongoing relationship with your child's teachers and providers. So meet with them in advance. So I usually have what I like to call a pre-IEP meeting. If a parent-teacher conference has happened recently, I may not need to have an additional meeting with the team, but I try to meet with them just to go over my child's progress, see how my child is doing, have that discussion. It is important to build and maintain a relationship with your child's teachers and therapists throughout the school year. So some opportunities you may have to do this: parent-teacher conferences. I know some schools use Class Dojo, email, text, etc. These are all examples of ways to communicate about how your child is doing. You can also share your goals and concerns and supports that your child may need, right? And then the team can also share with you as well. So this can help the whole team to be on the same page at your meeting, so there's little to no surprises. So how can you meaningfully participate in your meeting? I know the chat is disabled unless I will ask you guys to share in the chat. So just think about, how can you meaningfully participate in your child's IEP meeting? So you want to listen for understanding rather than listen to respond. If possible, like I mentioned earlier, you can ask them to share the screen of the draft IEP as they go through each page so that you can see it and ask questions, right? So they shouldn't be coming to the meeting with a finalized IEP. Because you're a part of the process, you have a right to contribute to your child's IEP. Ask questions about anything you do not understand. So I know in special education, we tend to use a lot of acronyms. I'm trying to avoid doing that tonight. I know I've said IEP, but in the beginning, I did say that an IEP is an individualized education program. So ask questions about anything you don't understand. You have a right to take notes at the meeting. If your child is participating, encourage them to speak up as well about their needs, and make sure you prep them before the meeting so they know what to expect. When the meeting is over, so preparing for the meeting is one part of it, but once the meeting is over, you want to summarize everything that you and the team agreed on to confirm your understanding of what has been recommended. Ask when the IEP will be available. When will it be shared with you? I mean, sometimes we get calls on the helpline. It'll be 2-3 months later after an IEP meeting and a parent has not received their child's IEP yet. So you want to ask, when are you going to get the IEP, right? And then you also want to follow up in email to recap everything that was discussed. I think this is a good way to get things documented because mistakes happen. So for example, if the team agreed that your child was going to get speech therapy 3 times a week, right? 3 times 30, 3 times a week for 30 minutes. You want to make sure that's documented, right? And that you understand that's what's going to happen. So when you get that IEP and you check and you see something different, at least you have something in writing to back up what you're saying. As with any meeting, if there are any problems or any kind of disagreements that were not resolved, you want to plan for further discussion. I remember when we were having meetings in person, we would say, bring a picture of your child, put a face to the name, right? Especially if your child is attending a non-public school, the district representative might not know who your child is, right? Somebody at the committee, a special education office, they may not have never seen your child before. They don't work in the school building. So it's good to be able to put a name to the face. And just be ready to be an active and engaged participant in this IEP meeting process. So let's talk a little bit about what that means to be an active and engaged participant. All of the information shared tonight can be implemented to assist with how you prepare and participate in your child's IEP meeting. So because you as parents are the one consistent team member year after year, learning basic skills for effective participation is critical. So this slide just gives you an overview of skills that parents need to participate effectively at meetings. So you want to make sure you understand your child's disability, right? So if your child has cerebral palsy or your child may have ADHD or autism, you want to have a basic understanding of what those disabilities are and what they mean for your child. How do they manifest in your child? How do they affect your child in the school environment? You also want to know your rights and responsibilities as a parent, right? You want to be organized, right? So it's very important to be organized, and you want to practice clear and effective communication. So we also encourage you, as a part of your preparation, to call organizations like Include NYC before your IEP meetings to rehearse and organize your thoughts and your goals. So I know sometimes I may tell parents, send your child's progress reports, send the evaluations. Let's have a conversation about them, and so we can strategize how you can prepare for your child's IEP meeting. The reason why we have practiced good organization, because it helps you feel confident and it helps you feel centered when you're in your child's IEP meeting. Because I know sometimes, these meetings, sometimes they can be intimidating for parents. So once you're organized and you feel well prepared, it can build your confidence to be able to really advocate for your child. Since advocating for your child, it's going to be a lifelong process, there are a few things you will need to be organized. So, you may have already heard, you want to make sure you have your child's paperwork in a binder. So it's whatever works for you. I know some people like to have hard copies of things, so make sure everything is organized. Always check the dates on the correspondence that you get. Save all your envelopes. Dates are really important in this special education process. I would usually staple them to any letters that I get from the Department of Education, because that postmark date is really important, right? This can come in handy for if you do not get proper notice about a meeting placement, or if the district does not adhere to the required Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, timeline for the evaluation or for your child's IEP. So what do you do if your child's IEP is not working? Like, this special education process is just not working for them. It's really important as a parent, a caregiver, to monitor if services are being delivered. Keep a record, have the contact information of all your child's providers. This is all a part of preparing for your IEP meeting. You have a right to know who is working with your child. You have a right to have their contact information, right? If you don't have your child's, for example, if you don't have the speech therapist information, you can ask at the front office of your child's school if this information has not been offered to you. You also want to confirm with the school that sessions are happening. And the reason I say this, like, for example, I have a 5-year-old who has an IEP, and she tells me when she has speech and when she has OT, occupational therapy. However, my son, who's autistic, he's not really able to have a conversation with me. So he's not able to tell me, all the time if he's getting his services. So it's really important for me to be able to stay in contact with his therapist as well, just to be able to get that confirmation. If your child is not receiving services as mandated on the IEP, please keep a log of the date, time, the type of service, any kind of written communication with the teachers, the providers, the school staff in regards to this situation. You want to reach out to the school-based IEP team or the Committee on Special Education in writing about your concerns. So I know that during the pandemic, a lot, there were some children who went without services, right? Even now, there are some children who may not be getting their services on a consistent basis. So this is something that you really want to keep track of. Remember I said you have a right to request a meeting, right? To reopen the IEP. I called it a requested review IEP meeting. We also talk about reevaluation. So there are many ways as a parent that you can exercise your rights and be involved. So the special education process, it generates a lot of paperwork, right? That's why I was talking about being organized. You're gonna get a lot of letters, a lot of notices that will be sent to let you know what the Department of Education wishes to do or not do. Under IDEA, you have the right to receive prior written notice from the school whenever they propose to take or refuse to take any kind of action with respect to your child. For example, if they propose to change your child's placement or they refuse to evaluate your child, you have a right to respond and to try to get some understanding as to why this action is being taken. So as parents, you have opportunities to make choices along the way. So whenever you are working on a special education process and need someone to bounce ideas off of, feel free to call our helpline. I'm just going to refer to the slide a little bit here. You want to make sure that the services are being delivered, as I mentioned, at the number that's supposed to be delivered. So if your child's supposed to get physical therapy twice a week, you want to make sure that's happening. Get all your child's all the contact information for the providers who are working with your child. And you can ask for a requested review meeting if you believe that the IEP is not working. So parent involvement is your right. Remember, like I said before, you're entitled to be notified of IEP meetings. I had mentioned 5 days in advance. You have the right as a parent to grant, refuse, or withdraw consent. You also are entitled to be provided with all your child's paperwork. So the evaluations, copies of the IEP, progress reports, report cards. You have a right to get all of this information. And to also challenge any decisions that are being made about your child, right? If you do not agree with a decision that's being made at the meeting, let the team know. Follow up in writing with concrete reasons why you do not agree, and work with the team to discuss how you can come to a resolution that benefits and is appropriate for your child. If needed, you may need to request another meeting. You also have the right to escalate your case to the district superintendent's office, the Committee on Special Education chairperson, or the special education inbox. So that's specialeducation@schools.nyc.gov. If working with the district is not working, you can pursue dispute resolution options that can include mediation or an impartial hearing. As a parent, you do have rights. You can also call our helpline for help with any steps that are needed. Right, and like I already went through our helpline process before, where you would call and the intake coordinator would get some information, assign you to an educator who will be able to work with you to try to resolve your issue. Also, you may have heard about the procedural safeguards. So this is a document that outlines your right as a parent of a child with a disability who is receiving special education services. And you have a right to receive a copy of the procedural safeguards at your IEP meeting. So you must be given opportunities to participate in the discussions and decision-making processes about your child's needs for special education. So I know we covered a lot this evening. We went over what an IEP is. We talked about the types of IEP meetings, right? Who is on the IEP team, how to prepare for the meeting, and what you can do when there is a disagreement. So I thank you all for listening. And now I would like to open it up for questions. If you have any questions about any tips that I've shared tonight on how to prepare for your meeting or about anything shared tonight, please ask. One thing I will caution you, if you have a more involved issue regarding your child's IEP, please connect with your child's school. We also encourage you to contact our helpline for assistance. And I'm going to put up a slide at the end that will have that helpline information for you. And so
Hannah, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm going to ask a few questions that have been recurring in the Q&A for us. So we had a great question that I think, while one person asked it, others may actually be wondering the same thing. So one of the questions is, in the earlier slides, you talked about reconvene and those types of meetings, but can you actually describe to this group what is an IEP amendment versus a reconvene versus a reevaluation, and how those are different from one another, and when those different types of IEP processes can be used?
Yeah, can you repeat the questions? I'm sorry.
Sure. Can you describe the difference between an IEP amendment versus an IEP reconvene versus an IEP reevaluation? How are they different from one another, and how are they each used?
Yes, so when we talk about the reconvene, it could be where maybe you had a meeting with the team and you decided you were not able to come to an agreement, right? And now you have to come back to the table to try to have further discussion about what you were not able to agree on. And this is your opportunity to bring the whole team together to have that discussion, right? In regards to the reevaluation, like I had mentioned before, there might be some cases where your child is not making progress, or maybe it's being determined that this might not be the right setting for the child. It may have been a while. It may have been a while since the child was evaluated, so it's time for a new evaluation. Or the child may be due for a mandated 3-year reevaluation. After that, if those evaluations happen, the team needs to come together to discuss the results to see if any changes need to be made to the IEP. So that would be another opportunity. And then an amendment has to do with any kind of major changes that have to be made on your child's IEP.
Thank you so much, Panna. We also had another question around so we actually usually get this question in reverse, but what happens if a student moves from the New York City Department of Education to a non-New York City Department of Education school? Maybe the child's moving from Queens to Long Island, or from Bronx to Westchester. What happens there?
So one thing I would tell a parent, yes, so you're right. We usually get the reverse, where a family is moving to New York City. So if you're moving, I would suggest before you move, of course, you want to make sure that you've already identified, the school district and everywhere that you're going to be moving to. You want to have already made connections with that school district just to see what their processes are. And also, one crucial thing I would say, you want to make sure you have a copy of your child's records. So you have a right as a parent to request your child's educational file. So you may want to contact the district to get your child's entire file so that you can be able to share this with the new school district. Let them know that your child had an IEP in New York City. They will be able to give you something called comparable services until they're able to have a meeting with you to develop the new IEP. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind. You want to make sure that you have all your child's paperwork. You want to have already established some kind of contact with the district where you're moving. And then you also just keep in mind that, for example, if your child is getting speech 3 times a week, they will try to give you comparable services, but that doesn't mean they're going to get exactly what's on the New York City IEP.
Thank you, Panna. We have some folks are also asking, can you go over what do parents have the right to ask for from their teachers or their IEP or their related service providers before the meeting, after the IEP meeting? What do parents get to ask for in advance of the meeting?
So one thing you want to make sure you have your child's paperwork. You're entitled to all of your child's paperwork. So any kind of reports, any evaluations, any documentation that the team is going to be using during the IEP meeting discussion, you have a right to ask for that. You also, you're able to ask for example, if your child is exhibiting challenging behaviors in the classroom, you can ask for a functional behavioral assessment, right? So it's also known as a FBA. And this is where, for example, the school psychologist can come into the classroom to be able to observe your child to see what's the antecedent for the behavior, right? What's triggering the behavior? What does the behavior actually look like? What's the consequence for the behavior? And they're gonna take some data and then determine if a behavior intervention plan needs to be created to try to come up with some strategies that can be able to support your child's behavior in the classroom. That's something you could ask for. There's a section on the IEP, and I didn't mention this today, I'll mention it now. There's a section on the IEP known as the management needs. So think about what your child needs to be able to feel supported in the classroom. There might be some children who may need movement breaks, right? That can be incorporated on the IEP. Some children may need graphic organizers or a visual schedule. Those are some things that you can ask for to be put onto the IEP. You also have a right, like if there are specific goals that you would like your child to work on, if there are challenges that your child is having, you have a right to contribute to the goal writing process at your child's IEP meeting. You may also believe that your child's not getting enough services, right? So maybe he or she is only getting speech 1 day a week. You've had conversations with the speech therapist. You've been able to get some insight. You're observing your child, and you can ask for more services, but it should be framed around not I want more speech for my child. It should be, what does your child need, right? And you're able to give concrete evidence and reasoning behind your requests. So those are some examples of things that you can ask for. You can ask for support services, right? So your child may need a paraprofessional to be able to support them with behavior or feeding or toileting. Those are some things that you can ask for at the meeting.
Thank you, Pana. So there's a couple of questions that are related to when a parent can ask for another IEP meeting. And so I'm wondering if you can just review again with our audience, when can, under what circumstances and when can parents request IEP meetings?
Okay, so I'll do this in a form. So I had mentioned before about the requested review IEP meeting, right? And you have to have sufficient reason to do so. So I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you had an IEP meeting in March, right? And now we're in May. Your child is exhibiting challenging behavior in the classroom, or you're getting feedback from the teacher that they're just not making progress. They might be in a large classroom. They might be in a integrated co-teaching classroom, or ICT classroom, and it's really hard to get them to pay attention and to stay settled. The setting is just not working, or the services are just not working. Those can be some reasons to bring the team together to be able to have another conversation about your child, to reconsider the placement or to reconsider the service mandate that your child is getting. If you're asking for a requested review IEP meeting, because like I mentioned, you're going to have a meeting one time per year. So if you're asking for this meeting before that one time a year, that annual meeting, you want to make sure you have sufficient reason to do so. And those are some of the examples that you can do that for. So it could be where you feel like your child is not making progress, he or she may be regressing, or maybe your child has exceeded their goals, right? So it's not always negative. There could be some positive going on. Your child may have really made a lot of progress, and you feel like that your child is just kind of coasting through. So you can bring the team together to really have a meaningful discussion about the services and the setting, and is it still meeting your child's needs?
Thank you so much for that answer. So we have just a few minutes left, and we had a few questions related to what happens if we disagree. What happens if we disagree with the IEP team, or what happens if we've brought additional information that the IEP from outside that the IEP team disagrees with. Can you talk a little bit about, again, what happens if there is a disagreement? And then I'm going to finish up with one more question that I've saw recurring. So one more after this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you disagree with the IEP team, you do have some options, right? So my first suggestion would be to try to work with the team to come to a resolution, right? You want to make sure you're framing your disagreement around the benefit of your child and what's appropriate for your child, right? Because your child is entitled to a free and appropriate public education, right? So it has to be appropriate. So it's not what you want per se. It's what's beneficial and what's appropriate for your child. So you want to try to resolve it at the school-based level, right? If that's not working, I had mentioned you can escalate it to the superintendent's office. You can escalate it to your committee on special education CSE office. You can escalate it to the DOE central office. I had mentioned a special education inbox, special education at schools.nyc.gov. Those are some ways you can escalate it. Now, if those methods are not working, you have the right to ask for mediation. So mediation is voluntary. The Department of Education could agree to mediation, or they could decline. So you have a right to ask for mediation, to request mediation. There are consumer dispute resolution centers, one in each borough, and they will be, it's like a neutral third party who would facilitate the mediation. So it wouldn't be somebody from the Department of Education that will be facilitating. You can also ask for an impartial hearing. The reason why I mentioned mediation as well is because a lot of times parents go straight for impartial. Like sometimes parents will call our helpline and they've already filed for an impartial hearing. They may, they may have had one conversation with the school, one disagreement, and they've already filed. So try to see how you can work through those steps with the school and try to work through the various escalation processes that I mentioned. You can also call us at Include, because we can be a thought partner for you to try to see how we can come to try to help you to process it, to see how you can resolve the issue before you move ahead.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask one more. I know we are at time, but this conversation is so good and the questions still keep coming. So I'm just going to hold you maybe for 2 more minutes. A question that has come up a few times is actually that the parent is unable to make the IEP meeting that has been scheduled, even though they have been given several attempts. And so it is a collaborative process, but we're having a hard time actually agreeing on a date or time. Any strategies, any tips? What can we do here?
So I know this can come up a lot because, for example, there are some CSCs, some Committee on Special Education offices where they only have meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so, and you may not be able to get those days off. So under IDEA, the team really is supposed to work with you to find a time that's mutually agreeable for both parties. So it cannot always just be on their terms. They're supposed to work with you to find a date that works for everyone. What I usually tell parents, you want to offer some dates and let the team know that you're flexible. So it shouldn't just be, I can't make this day or I'm not available. You want to offer some dates to them. The only time they can have a meeting without you is if they made a reasonable effort to reach out to you and you were not cooperating. Then they can go ahead and have the meeting without you. But of course, we don't want that to happen, right? Because remember, I said the parent is one of the most valuable parts of the IEP team. So it's really trying to have that conversation with the team and try to work through finding a date that works for everybody. It has to be an ongoing process. It's not something where both people kind of dig their heels in. You really have to come to the table and see how you can compromise to be able to get that meeting done, because it has to be done.
Well, Pana, thank you so much for all answering all these questions and really for a lovely presentation. And thank you, Kim, for taking over the Q&A at the end. Really appreciate that. Well, everyone, thank you again for joining Beyond Access tonight. As you can see on the screen right here, though, for the last words with Include NYC, if you need to get in touch with them, their helpline number is right here. I'll make sure to include in tomorrow's email. And again, if you have any questions about any more on this webinar, you can reach out to the special education at schools.nyc.gov. Or you can respond back to the emails for Beyond Access at at schools.nyc.gov. But thank you so much, everyone. And again, next week is our last Beyond Access session for the school year. So please look out for that announcement as well. But otherwise, thank you again, Pana. We really appreciate it, and hope everyone has a lovely rest of their evening. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.